These are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Sneha, on behalf of NEN and Wadhwani Foundation, would like to invite you all for this webinar and also introduce our expert, Sijo Kuruvilla George. He is the CEO of Startup Village in Cochin. He is passionate about technology and entrepreneurship. As CEO of Startup Village, he provides leadership and vision in setting up the country's first PPP model Technology Business Incubator. He brings along management consulting experience with the two of the big fours, PwC and Deloitte. As a consultant with the strategy and operations practice, he has advised various public and private sector institutions on strategy, business plan, PPP, project feasibility, governance, and urban infrastructure. Fresh out of college and after a very brief stint with technology major Infosys, he along with few friends founded MobMe, a young and vibrant startup with mobile VAS space. MobMe today is the proud winner of many prestigious innovation and entrepreneurship awards, the latest being the Emerge 50 by NASSCOM. Before I hand over the floor to Siju, there are a few reminders for the audience. You will all be on mute. You may ask questions by typing in the panel provided. Over to you, Siju.
Thanks, Neha. Thanks for thanks, Neha. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the introduction. So the striking part of what enables me to be here to give this conversation is the fact that we ended up doing a small startup while we are back in college itself. So in that sense, I'm a first generation entrepreneur. So we started in my final year of engineering. We started a small company called MobMe, which is earlier known as Talk. We started out with small SMS-based applications and stuff like that. Over a period of time, we raised angel investments of close to 80 lakhs initially while we were in college itself. Subsequent to that, as on date, we are one of the largest and most profitable value-added service players in the industry. Maybe rated as one of the most fastest growing as well. So we do deliver products and services for most of the telcos in India. So that's what we broadly do. The story has been in such a way that the founding team, most of us were a bunch of mechanical engineers. So that sort of gives you a perspective of where we started and where we went. So this is a broad context which I have in terms of the conversation for the next 20-25 minutes. Subsequent to that, I've had been working with a couple of consulting companies for a brief bit. Now I'm heading an initiative called Startup Village, which is essentially an incubator, which looks at bringing a whole lot more technology product companies in the Indian ecosystem. We strongly believe in the power of very young minds, especially the ones in colleges, to come out with amazing and innovative stuff. So the presentation is also broadly structured around our learnings and experiences of being a campus startup or starting as a campus startup and being a first generation entrepreneur. So that's broadly the essence of what I'm trying to capture, how you go about doing a startup. Some of the terms that I've used here have been refined over the years. It used to be very different when I was started back in college. So let's just take a look at it. So yes, we have run a startup, and of late I'm seeing a whole lot of startups as well. I serve as mentor and advisor to some of them, and I have a lot of incubated companies and startup village as well. So one of the things I want to flag initially before we go further in terms of understanding what a startup and how we go about the whole process is the fact that it's, a startup requires a very different mindset to actually operate. So half the time I see people running a small startup the way they would run a big enterprise. So in some sense, you're trying to mimic a larger enterprise when you're running a startup. Now, this mentality has to really change. So that's one of the first thoughts which I have to give you. So these are not smaller versions of larger corporations. It has to be very nimble. It has to be based on execution. It has to be based on trial and error. So that essentially is what a startup mindset has to be. So we're experimenting and trying out a whole lot of stuff when we're really starting out with a small idea and trying to convert it into a business. So I've sort of given a small definition out there. It's a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. I'd like to make a reference to this particular image here. So this definition was given by Reid Hoffman, a LinkedIn co-founder. Not his first company. So it's more like jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down. So I would sort of completely agree with this particular thought process. You're trying to figure it out, and the key word is actually the business model. Most people talk about it. We'll try to understand what that means in a very early context. Entire presentation is going to be structured as a very early organization part of it. So now that we understood what the kind of thought process you need to bring in when you're trying to run a startup, some of the thought traps which I keep coming across very often is the fact that especially when you run a technology startup, when you want to start up a technology startup, most of it is run by people who are very passionate about technology. You're wedded to your technology, you are either engineers who look at technical stuff, and then you start thinking in terms of a product or a service, and you sort of start looking at features you have to add to it, how cool it is and stuff like that. It is almost never about your product in most cases. Yes, there are some instances which are completely based on engineering technology, but almost always that's not quite the case. So it is not your hobby project, you're trying to create a business out of it, and so the thought process has to be slightly different there. Another thought trap is a scale impact. You try to build stuff which is at a 100,000, 200,000 user level, then essentially what you're trying to do is essentially figure out the first few set of users and what they want. And one of the best excuses in marketing. If I have a few $1 million budget, I could have done the same, replicate the same success. One of the most oft heard excuses, an oft repeated term, but not really the case. Some of the thought traps, but when you say this is not how you're supposed to think, you also need to know how you're supposed to think. Think only in terms of the customer and the business model. And while you start thinking on these two terms, there is one reference that I have to make in terms of what is the process of how do you go about it. So I have a small video which I came across on the net, which sort of captures it. I hope you can hear the audio as well.
Want to make it happen? Life's short, let's do this. Your mantra of choice is this: I'll figure it out. You figure it out. You will figure it out. You need to strike this from your vocabulary. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, but I don't know what to do. You figure it out. Remember this: everything you have ever done in your entire life in the history of humanity has brought you to this point. It's a whole lot of life force on your side. First kiss, a blank page, white space. Beginner's mind is an open mind, and an open mind innovates. Respect your fear. It's part of the creative process, and it keeps you alert. What are you going to give up to get where you want to go? Because you can't have it all, but you can always have and always do great things. Aim for passion. Balance, it's a myth. Tell us your dream. When you declare it and share it, you're accountable and you're helpable. Don't let perfection become procrastination. Every masterpiece that's ever been done, it could have been better. Just launch and learn. Everything is progress. The universe is always expanding, and that includes you. You want to make it happen? Do what you say you're going to do. Do what you say you're going to do. Do what you say you're going to do. Keep it pointed to where you want it to go. Every day, today, now, do a little more of what you really want to be doing and do a little less of what you don't want to do until your ideal becomes what's real. You can do this. You got this. You can make it happen. Want to make it happen?
So that sort of captures some of the thought process. You actually figure it out. You launch and learn. That's essentially the methodology. I have shared some of the resources. I've given the links to these resources, some of the resources I've used during the presentation. So what is more like the code? It's you need to start thinking of in terms of value proposition and a bunch of users who are probably willing to buy it or pay for it. So these are some of the ways you need to start thinking about it. in allegiance to the particular reference, so this is a slide which sort of gives you a figure of how do you find valid idea. It's one of the startup roadmaps that I came across, which is pretty interesting. So I'd like to draw your attention to this particular portion which talks about what is entrepreneurship, especially right now. So you see a gap, you allocate resources, and you create value. That's the technical jargon part of it. But mostly I would like to allude to the sentence that says that the purpose of a business is to find out and serve customers and to do it profitably. So that's the core essence of it, and the first challenge is to actually taking action. It's all about an execution. That's the name of the game. So what does the roadmap really look like? Every time you have a plan, essentially what you have is a bunch of guesses. The user has this particular pain point. I need to understand, and I'm going to build a product which solves a particular pain point, and it's going to work in the market. So essentially, all that you have in strategy, while you call it a strategy, is a series of guesses about what is the status of the market and what really works and what really doesn't work. So the roadmap is you quickly iterate and figure out, which of the guesses are actually true, what of them are facts, and what of them are actually not true. So that's the real process that is there to it. And then in the customer development process, that's where you actually validate whether you can serve them profitably, whether the person really needs it. So this entire process is centered around actually failing, if you really look at it. You iterate through failures. You move from one failure to the next one. So in an average scenario, this is what your ideal product development cycle should look like. You have an idea, and then you move to a proof of concept, and then you create a mature stable thing. But in reality, this is how it's going to be, or this is how it has to be. You have to quickly iterate, because half the time what you think that the customer wants, or what you think the actual idea is going to be, you have to iterate it several times before you get to your final product. So essentially it's about trial and error. It's about evolution more than anything else. And the speed of iteration actually beats the quality of iteration. There are enough people to support this whole worldview as well. The last, the organization structure, it has to be entirely founder driven, and in that sense there is no real sales process in a startup. All you have is a customer discovery or a customer development process. You're really trying to figure out whether a product or idea that you have has a place in the market. So in that sense, one of the two key ingredients is the hustler and the hacker. The hustler goes out in the market, keeps coming back with the data. The hacker is the one who cranks out the code or whatever you have to build it for that. The one-page business plan is all that you need. I emphasize it again and again. Half the time when you are in a very early stage, it doesn't make sense to create a whole elaborate business plan of a 5-year operation plan, everything. You need to do that. There is a value in it, but after you have traversed the first cycle. In that sense, all that you need is a plan which looks something like this. Quickly create a plan. So all about speed and execution action. So you can write this stuff in, let's say, a day or two, and then quickly go to the market and figure it out. So every 2 to 3 days, you could probably have a fresh sheet filled out. And then over a period of time, over 2 to 3 weeks or over a month or 2 months, you'll have a whole lot of data points based on which you'll have clarity on how you want to take it forward. But the first couple of sales or the first couple of customers has to be brought on board by the founding team. That is only at the point where you actually have a product or a service. The product or a service, so I sort of use the term value proposition, because otherwise it sort of clouds your thought process. So what you need to do is, it's pretty simple. It has to either solve a customer problem or it has to satisfy a customer need. That is all that is there to it, even when you think of a product and a service. It has to make sense for the customer. So the thought process has to be centered around the customer. And while you build something and show to them, so that is where the whole process of trial and error comes into picture. And that's where the concept of an MVP, the minimum viable product, comes into picture. The idea has to be eliminate as much as possible. Get that core feature of benefit which is useful for the user, and let the user comments and feedback guide your development process until you reach some sort of a form. I'm not saying you to asking anyone to incorporate all the things that the user asks you. You always use the judgment, but it needs to be driven by feedback at every given point of time. If Gmail could have been written in a day, that's what they claim they do. Our product or service has to come out in a quick time into the market so they can start soliciting feedback. This is what the whole culture has to be in terms of startup. There is a book called I'm Feeling Lucky written by a Google employee, ex-Google employee, which really gives you a huge insight of how a startup really functions. It's very different, it's very interesting read. I would really recommend that. And in terms of when you start thinking about, let's say, a product and customer and stuff like that, start thinking about one customer or one primary group of customers. So let's say final year mechanical engineering students or a student. It helps to start thinking of an individual person when you start looking at your customer. So that's where the concept of personas come into picture. This particular reference that I've given gives an example of what a persona is and how do you detail out a persona. So you detail out one particular person. It's more like a role-playing kind of a scenario, but it starts giving you huge insights into what a customer would want, what your customer would want, and think only in terms of a primary customer. Who is going to be the first customer, the first few people who want to use your product or service? The first few people should find a need for it, should use it, and should be extremely happy about it. This is what you have to start off with. The first part is what I'm emphasizing again and again, the customer discovery, the customer validation, pivoting until the point you reach that point. It's a complete search of what really works in the market. Steve Blank has given an entire process around it. Bottom line is validation. How do you validate it? It's just to get out of the market. You just mentioned the earlier video about the fear of the unknown, that really unsettles you and everything. Half the time, people really, or the founding team, the startups really keep working on a product because in a sense, they're afraid to go to the market because once you go to the market, it's actually real. It's real-time feedback. And there's a lot of negative feedback that's also come along with it. No, this is not exactly what I wanted. I don't get it. So getting out in the market, getting comfortable with that whole process of addressing your fears and addressing it is the key to move forward. Just keep talking. That's the whole idea. Just keep talking to your partners, your vendors, your customers, whoever you have in the ecosystem, solicit feedback. Keep documenting stuff. It's really interesting because over a period of time, you actually get a whole lot of insights if you keep documenting each and every interaction. So that's what the last line is all about. You're on a series of experiments in that sense. It's more like doing tests and getting a whole lot of data itself. So the thought process is captured here. If you can't measure it, you can't fix it. Essentially, the process that we talked about is moving from an idea to a product or a service or a value proposition that user wants. And the entire iteration procedure, you have to keep tweaking and tweaking at every given point of time. And for that, you need data. You have to keep measuring something, otherwise you don't really know what to tweak. This, at the end of the day, is what really it's all about. Some of these aspects get discounted by a lot of first-generation entrepreneurs when you're trying to hit the market first time. So one aspect I would say, how will you receive your payment? So people can come up with answers like, hey, there's a mobile payment or a CC revenue payment and stuff like that. Half the time what people miss is the fact that there is a transaction cost at each payment scale. So if you're using a payment gateway, if you take a CC revenue payment gateway, there is a 5.5 or a 3.5% charge. So there has to be some sort of a thought process that each of these charges are going to happen in the entire value chain. And once that whole process is there, how do you reach them? How do you deliver a product or service to them? What are the costs associated with it? Can you then do it economically? And are people willing to pay? If people are willing to pay, that's like the best case. If you give it to someone, a potential user, they say, hey, I love it. I don't even mind paying for it. That's one of the best litmus tests of saying that, hey, this stuff actually is quite good to people. I mean, the person really wants it. So the business model canvas also, this is again a resource which you'll find on the web itself. It's one of the most frequently used. This sort of gives you a picture of the various aspects that you need to look at in terms of looking at how do you want to structure a business model. So the value proposition is the part where the product and features and everything comes into the picture. But there are a whole lot of other aspects as well. What are the key activities, what are the key partners, the revenue streams, the customer segments. We did touch upon this in some measure on in the earlier slides. That's the earlier first starting discovery process. And this is a process where once you've identified a value proposition, something the user wants or the customer wants, you're trying to build a business around it. And this is what this stage is all about. I'm again not going into the exact details of how do you do this with paucity of time. I'll be more than happy to do that at a later stage if required. So now that we come to it, before we conclude the session, I'll definitely have to make a couple of points about the whole thing about marketing. So half the time, especially the earlier factor which I mentioned, when it's a bunch of technical founders who have a huge bias towards technology and technical oriented stuff, you tend to see marketing as a game when you spend a few advertising dollars and get some quick bucks around it, which is not quite true. So the title is something which I picked up from one of the books I've read. It clearly sums it up. So the key word is hustling. And a rule of thumb, get to the first sale as quickly as possible, even if it's $1. It makes a huge difference, and that's the first point, that first trickle of revenue. Get it as early into the cycle as possible, however you get it. The whole cycle, once you complete it, it starts giving a different perspective about the the mindset which you have in mind. There are tons of measures and methods of how you can get a whole lot of marketing and PR without actually spending a single advertising dollar. And as a startup, when you don't have a lot of resources and everything, you should be really smart in leveraging each and every of this opportunity to convert into revenue or into customers or into products, product reviews and reference. So one of the books, the startup, $100 startup, gives you a very detailed 39-step product launch checklist. Most of them are very interesting, very basic, and it gives you a whole lot of insights on how you can actually go about the whole process without really spending much money around it. Yeah. Okay. So I thought I had some message, but I'm sorry about that. So given the scenario, so the next slide gives you various ways. Once you have a customer, how do you keep them and grow them? That is the part which is of interest also to you. So these are some, again, a broad graphical representation of how you really keep growing your customers as well. This can be used as a reference material. I did mention the hustling bit quite a bit. One of the key strengths that a startup actually requires, very important when you're trying to create something going for you. People only buy experiences, that's the bottom line. You're not really trying to sell a product or service, you're only trying to sell an experience. Just gave a couple of examples which was picked up in the net. You can go through it in detail. I have to make a reference to this point. Half the time, the startup strategy, which I keep hearing when it's a fresh company, is the fact that, hey, I'll offer it at a much more smaller price than a competitor. As a startup, I have this bias towards saying that, hey, you need to actually price it higher than a competitor because you will be able to meet the demand or the requirement at a much better manner. So the ideal thing which you should get comfortable is to actually sort of price it high and defend it. It may not always work, but then it clearly gives clarity on what the value you're actually offering to the client as well. So this is one of the case studies that I came across on the web. It talks about a case study where the same product was sold as 2 different price points. The higher price point ended up getting the entrepreneur or the promoter a lot more money and profits than the first one. So there are enough countless examples like this. These are also points of testing out various kinds of things. This, if you can't really figure out how do you go about the pricing, this kind of a model, 3 different price slabs with the one in between or the one highlighted and chosen by default as your preferred price plan. This is a tried and tested model which you can really use. Some of the good books I would refer and recommend is The $100 Startup is a good book to really start thinking about a lot of ideas in business in that sense, a simple thing. I'm Feeling Lucky is a book by an ex-Google employee. It gives you a real picture of what a startup culture is all about. You Can Sell by Shiv Khera is a really interesting book. A lot of very simple basic stuff is there. There's also a book called 4-Hour Workweek. Probably you can look at it at a slightly later stage, but I also found it very interesting in terms of looking at how much more productive you can be in terms of doing your work and stuff like that. Aside of this, a couple of books I mentioned, the Steve Bank process, there's a book around the startup manual. So there are a couple of books which are already mentioned in these slides as well. So broadly, yes, this is what I've wanted to cover in this particular whole webinar. The subsequent slides, so some of the stories I've really built on the experience of actually building Wapni, which is the company which I've started and founded. It took us about 3 years to figure out the actual business model. We got to the product in about a year and then took another year, year and a half to figure out the actual business model of how we will make money out of it. InNose is another mobile VAS company. They do SMS-based search. It's also a very interesting example of how you really structure a business. It's a pure play product company. It has a valuation of close to 100 crore. It's invested by seed fund. The founder is all of 24 years of age. iTraveler is again a product in travel and tourism space. So I have enough case studies to probably go through in detail. But the bottom line essence of this particular slide is the fact that, even in those markets which you probably not consider as hot sectors, there are enough avenues and opportunities to build a viable business. So that essentially is the theme which I wanted to capture. If you want to know more about these things, I can take it up in the Q&A session later. So that's broadly that's there to it in terms of the presentation. I have a few more slides. Yeah. This is what it is all about in short. I'll take quickly 2 more minutes in rounding up the next couple of slides which I have. So I've given a couple of examples of these are very small product ideas or companies based on apps and those kinds of things, very simple stuff, which are done by people in our community. So those case study examples are those people who can connect you to, and they are generating somewhere close to $1,000 to $2,000 a month, or even upwards to $5,000, $10,000 a month. Very simple ideas, not path-breaking. So one of the examples is what I call the Tic Tac Toe game. It's a very simple game which all of us have been used to. It's not a unique idea. It's not a unique, difficult idea in that sense. But the implementation of how it actually went to the Android market and started generating money and everything, with an interesting case study as well. So the story starts at that point also quite a lot. So in that sense, for those people who are struggling to figure out what the idea could be, that is why I wanted to put those kinds of examples to just get you a feel of where you could potentially start, and then you can start building on top of that. So just some points around that as well. The last point is something which you have to really focus on. You need to focus on psychography. You need to focus on what the user thinks and feels. It makes a whole lot of difference in the way a person perceives the product as well. So in that sense, let me just close it for the time being. I will take the remaining questions during the Q&A. These are ways in which you can reach me. I've broadly tried to touch upon the concepts of how you navigate the initial years of a startup. So yes, I'll just stop it here.
All right, thank you, Sijo, for a wonderful presentation. We will start with the Q&A now.
Okay.
So our first question is from Ravi Singh, and he says, please mention an SAS or PAS service provider to run a website like OLX or Quicker, where users can log in and post the items they want to sell from all over India. The service should allow me a pay-per-use option like www.buildbazaar.com is allowing.
So what I'm understanding is that the user, this Ravi is trying to figure out a platform like OLX, where I can use it for selling as a pay-per-use kind of a model. Can I have some more information? What exactly is he trying to do with this information? Because I don't have any specific answer to this particular thing. You know, OLX and Bill Bazaar and eBay and all are there. Can I get some context around the whole question as to what Ravi is trying to sell, or what is his idea?
I'll ask him to post that. Till then, we can take another question by the time he gives us the details. The next question is from Abhishek Day. He says, what do you mean by pricing?
What do I mean by pricing? Okay, so the context I had in mind when I mentioned pricing is the fact when you're trying to build a product and sell it to users. So yes, there are a couple of different models when it's an ad-supported model or where it's a direct payment model. But irrespective of that, there is always a price point. So if it's an ad-supported model, let's say if I have a web page and I want to have a banner ad, how much am I going to charge the customer or the person who takes the ad? So that's one way of looking at it. A good example of this particular model is, I would say, Abhishek should check out this website called Baydin, B-A-Y-D-I-N. It's a very good example of a good, well thought out product company which really sells their product. It is an email management plugin, essentially. That's what the product is to work. But I've come across a whole lot of people who have been extremely happy about the whole thing. They sell the service at $15 a month, and I know a lot of people who are subscribing to it at $15 a month as well. The idea or the key is, how do we converge on this particular value? How do you find out how much I charge the product? Is it going to be $1 per month, $15 per month, $10 per month? So this is what I essentially meant by pricing. What will have to be that price point the customer, the user will have to pay? Even if it's an ad-supported model, there's always a price because there has to be some revenue that comes in at some point of time. The idea of putting that pricing there had two aspects to it. A, most startups get to the point where they say, hey, I'll just give it for free, which would mean I'm giving a whole lot of stuff for free and people should actually use it. Half the time, it may not be a best strategy. Sometimes it might make sense to actually have a value around it and then provide a version, a stripped out version for free. So you can tinker or experiment with various these kinds of pricing models or options. And it's very essential to even test out those kinds of things as well. So that is what I mean by the pricing part of it and why it's essential to have a whole lot of thought process and testing around the whole pricing model as well.
Our next question is from Omar, and he says, I hope so. Our next question is from Omar, and he asks, how is the e-commerce field to enter as a startup?
I can give you my perspectives and thoughts around the e-commerce space. So, the e-commerce space today is a whole lot more easier for a startup to get in some sense, because companies like Flipkart and all have really, what I can say, educated the users about buying online. So one of the biggest things Flipkart has really done to the ecosystem is that even my dad and mom have started buying from Flipkart. So traditionally, all these people were skeptical about the whole online purchase platform, and now these guys have taught people the whole process of buying online. It's more like saying that Captain Gobinath really taught the middle class India to start flying, get used to the whole experience of flying as well. So in that sense, it's a whole lot more easier for a young startup to get in the e-commerce space. There is knowledge, there is an ecosystem to some extent. There are enough off-the-shelf platforms that you can take and white label it or just purchase it off the shelf as a SaaS platform and start doing your startup in quick time. The concern here is the fact, again, on the flip side, now that the space has become slightly more crowded, you will need some economies of scale. You need to attain some amount of scale for you to be profitably doing stuff. It's a bit of a tricky industry because to the point that extent that I know, some of the big names are not struggling with their basic business model. Having said that, there are small niche players who are running extremely profitably as well. So yes, it's a whole lot more easier to get in and start operating. The market is maturing a whole lot more. There are enough opportunities to serve profitably. The disadvantage or the challenge remains the fact that you will have to be a bit more creative and intuitive in terms of figuring out the right niche and the right strategy in terms of tapping the market. But yes, it's an interesting space.
Our next question is from Aditi Bhatnagar, and she says, stepping into the market to get real-life feedback about our product, and to get this feedback, we must have some people, or can we do it all alone?
It's a very interesting question, Aditi. Do you do it all alone, or do we get some people? So I have one aside point also to that. It always helps to have a co-founder. The startup journey has its own ups and downs, and in that sense, having a person who you trust and who shares your vision and passion is amazingly great. It's a huge valuable resource in navigating the whole startup journey. Plus, different people start thinking differently, and one of the biggest creative and inspiration forces of human beings is the fact that I'm doing it with someone else. Hey, I'm just doing something interesting. So in that sense, yes, you're not doing it alone. Ideally, have a co-founder. It also serves as validation in the sense that, hey, there is someone at least you've already sold the story and the idea to someone else, and someone else is also willing to put his life behind this particular idea of yours. So in that sense, yes, not do it alone. In terms of getting user feedback, along with the team, it's actually great. You can quickly go to the market. There are enough ways to reach out to people. There are friends and family, or you can just walk into some place and ask people. You have the LinkedIns and Twitters of the world. So it's made increasingly easier to reach out to people and connect. And when I talk about user feedback and everything, don't start thinking about a very sophisticated market research method and everything. It's just talking to people. You can just, so if I'm having a mobile application which is looking at young business professionals, you could look at your brothers or uncles and those kinds of people, just have a conversation with them and just talk to them, have a conversation and see what they think about it, how they interact with the mobile app on their phone, what do they find interesting, what are their concerns. So in that sense, break it down, make it very simple, but yes, it always helps to have someone else also along with you, because that person can observe, can look at points which you probably would have missed. So yes, that's what I would say.
Okay, our next question is from Vikram Ribala, and he says, can you please explain more about one-page business plan?
Okay, so the idea about, so Vikram, the idea why I mentioned the one-page business plan, the reason why I said was that in the early stage, you create a very elaborate business plan, and half the time that's not really how the market operates. So you spend a whole lot of time detailing out the very specific marketing strategy and everything based on one core value proposition that you had. And all of a sudden when you reach the market, then you realize that that's not what the market wanted. You have to change it. So the whole process keeps repeating. The idea of a one-page business plan is to quickly move through that particular process. So the value of any business plan is in the planning process, and that's it. And beyond that point, you have to start executing and implementing it. So now that you mentioned the one-page business plan, I think I can take a quick look at this once again. So this is a one-page business plan. I hope you can see it, and it's categorized into 4 or 5 things. What will you sell? Just write in 1 or 2 sentences. It's not an elaborate, what do you call, huge product feature statement or something like that. So what will you sell? It's a mobile app which makes tracking credit card payments effortless. So that could be something which you plan to sell. Who will buy it? High-level executives who have an above average income, or you can really start detailing it out more and more. How will your business idea help people in this particular context? You can say that it gives them more freedom and they can trust their banking partner a whole lot more. So it relieves their stress and tension. So in a similar manner, you can fill out all these aspects in quick time. So if you have a focus session, probably can do it in 1 or 2 hours along with the team. And then you can, in the afternoon itself, in the morning you can do this, in the afternoon itself you can quickly go out and start talking to people. One additional point there, when you talk about a minimum viable product, half the time it need not even be a full-fledged application. It could just be a screenshot. It could just be a one-page landing page, just asking people, hey, would you like something like this? It could just be a video which says, hey, this is what it's going to do. Would you like to have it? It's about validating whether whatever you're proposing, someone else is interested or excited about it. So half the time, the ideal response you're looking forward is, hey, this sounds interesting. Why don't you let me know more? So this is essentially the whole idea around it. It's to fast track the whole process of going from a business plan to quickly into execution. The focus here is execution. You need to start doing stuff and you need to start doing stuff quickly. And then you iterate to a point where you have clarity on what exactly the market needs. So after 4, 5, 10 people, you'll start knowing more about the customer than the customer himself. So that's the idea behind the one-page business plan. It's to help you navigate quickly from the thinking mode to the actually doing mode. And this is all that it takes initially, in my opinion.
Our next question is from Kapil Manchanda, and he asks, in case of cloud service or subscription-based services, to gain initial customers, should we provide free trial? If yes, how much? And if no, then how to attract customers to choose cloud-based services?
So the free trial model is something which is there, is more like a standard industry as a practice right now. So to partly answer that question, Kapil, is the fact that people will expect you to offer them a free trial, which is good in some sense, because then the whole conversation is about the actual value that the user gains. And in any case, in a cloud-based model, you can't just do a one-time sale and make all your money. The person or the product, the customer, the product has to be used again and again. So in that sense, yes, having a free trial is great. But referring to my earlier conversation, you should create a value around it, saying that, hey, this is what it actually it costs. But why don't you try it for some time and figure out how the value around it is? So how do you reach that particular value? There are various thought process around it, but at the end of the day, that's also a trial and error method. Half the time, you should start looking at what this service is of value to the user. So your cost of building it could be, let's say, 10 rupees, but if the perceived value, if it is saving 100 rupees for the client, he is willing to pay you a whole lot more. The converse also applies. It might have cost you 100 rupees to build it, but if it's only saving him 10 rupees, he would not be willing to buy. So there's a lot of mixing and matching that is done. The costing and the pricing is limited by what competition is charging. If it's an entirely unique product, you could actually charge a premium. If it is not, you're limited by that. So all these factors do come into picture. But free trial, yes, it is a standard industry practice which most people adopt. The freemium model is the well-practiced thing. Having said that, before we sign off on that particular question, the idea is, especially when it's a SaaS product and stuff like that, you need to have the first set of people who is willing to use it. So for the first 4 to 5 set of people, it's not about the money that you're going to get from them. It's about whether someone trusts you enough to do this, to use that as a, so let's say a cloud service which helps you back up your phone contacts. It could make it easier for them, but the person should also be willing to trust you with that particular piece of information. The app should work, it has to have continuity. So someone willing to trust you and be your initial set of users You should not be really about the cost or the revenue that you make out of it. This person should be extremely happy. And in that process, you also earn a whole lot of feedback. So your product keeps improving from your first few customers until a point where your product knows better than your customers. So initially, you should not be extremely focused on that. So when I'm responding to couples' question, I'm taking the assumption that you're talking about a new product which you're about to launch into a market. If I were you, I wouldn't really fret about getting that perfect price point. If I were you, I would really work overtime to get that first initial set of customers and really working hard overtime to ensure that these people are amazingly happy. And these can be my first set of referrals. So they should be willing to tell their friends, hey, I've been using it for the past so many months. It's great. Why don't you also try it? So that would be my thought process in looking at the first set of customers. As a long-term strategy, building these freemium program is great. How do you find more customers? That is the slide which we broadly talked about. We can have a whole content strategy around it. How do you find, retain, and grow your customers? There are various marketing channels like direct sales is one channel, but it's not quite ideal for most online SaaS-based businesses. You will really need to crack the model of figuring out reaching your customers online, and that's where the metrics comes into picture again. How much are you spending in getting one customer? The company that I mentioned, iTraveler, it's a travel-based, booking-based site. Their entire traffic that leads to the site is through Google AdWords. So this numbers are somewhere for every user that they convert, they end up paying 2,000 rupees. For every user that they convert, they end up getting 5,000 rupees. So that's where the conversion numbers stand. So unless you track it, you won't be able to optimize the campaign. But yes, these are some of the ways you look at it. So there is AdWords search, there are organic searches, there are other blogs, SEOs, and those kinds of things. The digital marketing world is the best bet in terms of maximum leverage, and it's measurable, and it's one of the cheapest in terms of acquiring and growing customers.
Our next question is from Mr. Sahil. He says, what are your thoughts on analytics domain and how can one proceed further with developing analytics product and bringing it in the market?
So Sahil, the analytics space, personally, I would say it's a very promising and a very interesting space. It is the buzzword of the time. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people want to do it, and we need to optimize it. In times of recessions as well, when the markets are getting slightly more difficult to navigate, more and more people, more and more companies want these kinds of analytics solutions to do their businesses better. So having said that, it's a great space to be. One of the most amazing things about this particular space, which I personally like, is the fact that you can quickly show your impact in a very measurable way. Say you use my platform, and based on this platform and based on my analytics insights, you could optimize, you could increase your revenue by 10%, 30%. You can directly show and translate the actual impact from a revenue perspective also, which makes it increasingly more easier for you to convince the value and evolve a price around it. So in all those counts, it's amazingly great space. The concern is that the word analytics, if you use it from a generic perspective, could mean anything or a lot of things. That is not going to really get your money. So you have to really drill down a whole lot more in terms of figuring out what exactly is a small particular insight or data that this analytics software or platform of yours is actually going to give. So this is where the challenge lies, and there is a huge market for that, very niche, very segmented opportunities to access, absolutely profitable opportunities as well. I can give you a couple of examples from my incubator also if you reach out to me personally. That won't be an issue at all. But having said that, the challenge which most startups underestimate is the difficulty in actually getting access to the data. So much of the data resides in the corporate servers and everything. Once you have the data, it might be 10 times easier to run analysis, come with interesting conclusions, stuff like that. But getting access to that particular data, that is going to be one of the biggest challenging parts for a startup who wants to enter into this space, and one of the aspects which most startups would sort of underestimate as well, the effort, time and effort that goes into that. This goes on to the early question. You need to get that one or two customers who is willing to trust you with their data, and they believe that you guys will come up with something interesting. So that remains a challenge, but the opportunity space is just about getting started. It's a huge, huge market opportunity, and a clearly compelling value proposition also can be built around it.
Our next question is from Dr. Rahul Srivastav, and he says that, can you please give examples in the field of agriculture or rural development in India? ITC and Tata have started, but is it feasible for a small startup in this particular field in India? You know, a web-based company especially.
Okay. So Dr. Ravi, unfortunately, I would not have extremely deep insights to talk about this particular sector. I can give you my thought process on it. So any web-based business also has a strong offline component to it. So even if you take Shadi.com and Bharat Matrimony and stuff like that, all these businesses which has a real-time gratification component, it has a very strong offline component to it. The challenge in the agriculture sector in India is the fact that this offline component is extremely fragmented, broken. There are a lot of players in the ecosystem. There are a lot of multiple hops in the value chain, and then a lot of policies that restrict you from doing a whole lot of stuff. So from a very general standpoint, just having an online interface in this particular sector may not be a good viable opportunity, because the cost of doing the business offline is going to be substantially higher to invalidate the benefits that you gain from the online model. But I am still fairly sure that there are niches that exist in this particular market as well. So companies like Foolwala and all, which sell flowers and bouquets and everything, not entirely agriculture kind of a thing, but the dynamics are fairly the same. The realization happens extremely offline, and they have sort of been successful in building a scalable business out of it as well, a profitable business at least. So there are niches that do exist. I could potentially connect you to a couple of people who work specifically in this sector. IIT Madras had a rural incubator which specifically focuses at these kinds of innovations and business and markets. Not entirely agriculture focused, but yes, the markets that you're talking about is precisely on the dot. So that's something which I can do. Serving this particular market profitably is a concern. There is a value proposition, but serving that market profitably is a concern given the fact that the distribution channels to reach those markets is not entirely developed and mature. As a result of the cost of reaching them delivering might end up being slightly on the higher side. These are my thoughts around the process.
Our last question for the day is from Moses Pometkar, and he says, how is the market for ads on mobile in today's time? And can you suggest some research option for ads on mobile business?
Ads on mobile is still a good profitable opportunity. So within that itself, there are a whole lot of sub-strategies that do exist. It differs from platform to platform. It differs from product to product. So I can comment on those two aspects on a very broad level. So from platform to platform, if I do talk about it, if I take the iPhone platform, or let me start with the Android platform. If I take the Android platform, ads are almost the only way to sort of monetize it, because the billing platforms are not entirely integrated across the world. It's different from different places, and in India, it's only recently that there was an option to get a payment from a app person who downloads an app. So in that sense, all the developers that I know from India who are developing for the Android market, a good amount of them are generating good sizable revenues from advertising alone, so which gives a thumbs up to the advertising model. But that's just a very generic thing. There are a lot of sub-strategies within that market itself. It says that the different kind of app, so based on the engagement levels, you decide which particular ad platform is suited for you. Based on the geography, you again have to decide which sort of ad platform is suitable for you. So a lot of sub-strategies in that department. Broadly, yes, advertising is a monetizable option, revenue option, profitably as well. But given that if you look at the, let's say a BlackBerry platform, in that, let's say if the user base is slightly lower, an advertising model may not be feasible for you to monetize it. So for them, a payment option would be slightly less. So it keeps differing from platform to platform and from product to product. Having said that, in terms of various options, mobile network options, iPhone, people tend to purchase more on the iPhone. So I have numbers to substantiate claim that people end up spending a lot more money on iPhone, although there is a case of building a business around ads as well on the iPhone. On the BlackBerry, I'm not validated those numbers, but if the numbers are true, people do pay a lot more on the BlackBerry platform. On the Windows platform, from developers' perspective, on the feedback that I've been getting, the user base is a lot more, but the monetization through ads, for some reason, is slightly higher on the Windows platform in comparison to the Android platform. So these are not aggregate numbers for a user base, but as a general rule, if you really want to monetize on ads from a very large scale, you need to have a huge number of followers. A rule of thumb is saying that for every 10,000 active users, you could potentially be generating anywhere between $20 to $30 a day. These are a rule of thumb numbers which industry uses and operates. The question on how do we get more data on the research part of it, there are enough resources online, but it also depends on which category of apps you're looking at. If it's a game, I can refer to a couple of different sites. If it's product doing those kinds of applications, it's a different kind of a strategy that you adopt. So that becomes the what do you say, the checkpoint of how you look and where you look at it. A whole lot of it is where you figure it out on your own as well. So there is no standard recipe. It's a bit like search engine optimization. There are rules of thumbs on how you go about it. And the strategy that each person adopts is very specific to his or her case. But there are broad categories, and it differs from product to product and market to market. Broadly, it still is a good option to monetize.
Thank you so much, Sijo, for that interesting session. That was the last question for the day. And thank you to all our attendees for participating in the webinar. We are glad that the questions kept coming in, but due to lack of time, we are unable to answer all. Please send in your feedback and suggestions to us at eclub@nenglobal.org. Also, if you found the session interesting, feel free to blog or post about it. The recorded version of the webinar will be available on our website eclub.nenonline.org by the end of this week. Thank you once again and have a nice evening. Thank you, Sijo.
So, yeah, thanks a lot, Neha. Specific to this particular, now that I conclude the session, specific to the help that I am willing to offer or I am capable of offering is connecting specific people who are to others who are also in the similar domain industry, which is one of the best learning experiences. So if there are any instance like that, do feel free to write to me or reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to connect you to others in the particular domain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Neha. Thanks, everyone.